Good evening, everyone. This is Steve returning to you, aka Dreaming Crow, or as some people in the Left Hand Path community refer to me as Somnus Dreadraven. I am going to be bringing to you a two-parter this evening. Before we get into everything, of course, I want to wish everybody thank you for subscribing to my channel. If you're a new subscriber, thank you. If you've been with me a while, yes, I am getting back into doing new content. At this point, I feel that there's a point in my life where I've kind of gotten through some hurdles, and I'm slowly making my way back. This particular recording, again, is going to be a two-parter. I try to keep it as short as possible, but in order to make it so that it wasn't like an hour and a half long, again, I decided to break it up into two parts. And it's actually been on a topic that I've been wanting to do for a while. I kind of worked the last couple weeks on tracking everything down as far as information and passages and stuff like that, and kind of been working on it on my free time. I am working a third shift job now, unfortunately, so that kind of only gives me maybe an hour or so that I can tinker with things during the week. But at the moment, I do have my Friday, Saturday, and early Sunday mornings off between the new work week, and then I go back in Sunday evening to Monday morning. So this gives me a little bit of time to be recording here. So again, thank you for joining me again, and with that, let's see. So again, I was tracking down scriptures and passages for quoting, and I've been like rereading and asking questions and formulating opinions and everything. And for those of you, I'm not going to bore you too much with a lot of the passages. I'll probably read a few things in verbatim, but I will I will put up the quotes or the passages on screen, providing that they're not too long. And other ones I will probably just be adding at the end of the videos, so that if you want to go and read those yourself, you can very well do that. Also, for those of you who are interested in reading the actual passages yourself, you could go to www.biblegateway.com, and from the available versions under English, I chose New Revised Standard Version. Okay, you can choose any version that you like, of course. Just understand that by choosing a different version than what I've used here, passages will probably be vary slightly in words or writing style or something like that. So just in order to stick with what I have here, you might want to choose the same version, of course. Again, this is going to be a two-parter, and in some cases I made additional notes based on individual situations here. So without further ado, we're going to get into what I like to call Christianity's greatest lie to the world. Okay, we're also going to be doing a slight discussion on Egregores in the second part of the video series, and I'll be covering a little bit of some other information. So without further ado, let's jump into the video here. And so, despite how you may refer to him, Satan is probably the most widely recognized figure for most of us. Okay, to some, He is the reason why we refer to as there being evil in our world. And others, he's simply the enemy of God or the ruler of hell, Beelzebub, whatever you'd like to say. Just for a note here, I'm not classifying Lucifer and Satan as being one individual. I am separating the two as this video kind of goes along here. So now, oops. How is it that an angel, supposedly, because Satan was supposedly an angel, fallen from heaven by God's grace, not be a more prominent figure in Judaism? Hey, think about it. Satan, the Prince of Darkness, has its origins in the Old Testament, or at least from what Christians refer to as the Hebrew Bible. Okay, I think it's also called the Quran, if I'm not mistaken. But it's not the origin that you may think, or more appropriately, what you've been told to think by Christianity, as far as like who Satan is, or how Satan has become to be known. The name Satan actually stems from the Hebrew word Satan, which simply means adversary or accuser. Okay, now this is not the proper usage of the word as in a proper name where the S is actually capitalized. Okay, and for the most part, the actual proper usage of Satan, as far as like, referring to an actual name of an individual, was actually never really used in the Old Testament by the Hebrew. Okay, it's only been used to serve as a term to identify someone who's an adversary or an accuser of somebody. In fact, in the Old Testament, there never is or was a Satan, okay, proper, with a capital S. There was no devil. Instead, suffering in the world came from God himself, okay? And we can actually see this in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 7, where it says, I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I, the Lord, do all these things, okay? And again, this is in regards to the New Standard Revised Version of the Bible. But I'm going to back up just a little bit here and state that in Isaiah chapter 45, I include verses 5 through 7 here, and it says, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I arm you. I think that's supposed to be, I am you, though you do not know me. Give me just a moment here. I'm actually gonna pull that up because I'm wondering if I copied it wrong. It says I arm. I don't understand that. Give me just a moment. Oh, okay. So actually, it does say I arm you. So I'm wondering if it, I'm not certain it's to the purpose of it says arm though. But anyways, let me go back to there. Isaiah 45, chapter 45, verse 5. I am the Lord, and there is no other besides me. There is no God. I arm you, though you do not know me. Probably probably using that word in the sense that he defends you and so that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is no one besides me, and I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make weal and create woe. I, the Lord, do all these things. So, therefore, in the Old Testament, God alone controls and creates all these events, responsible for creation and destruction, both good and evil. And the Hebrews recognize this, okay? So who is or who was appropriately referred to as being Satan in the Bible? And for that, I do have a number of passages that I'm going to be covering here. The first 6 actually deal with people, that the term was actually used to describe, and the final 4 are in conjunction to celestial beings or angels or individuals that belong to the court of God or God's court, and that term is actually used to refer to that particular angel in this particular sense. Okay, so in the Old Testament of Samuel 1, chapter 29, verses 2 through 4, we find that David is on the run from Saul, the first king of Israel, and Saul fears that David might steal the throne from him, thus ending his reign. So during this time, David spends time hidden amongst the Philistine army, who are engaged with the Israelites at the time. And here we find that he is then forced out by the Philistine commanders, fearing that he might become a Satan or an enemy to their goals to conquering Israel. Okay, and so here again I have verses 2 through 4, and it says, as the Lord of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, send the man back so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Okay. Now, in the second usage of the term of the use of Satan, we have the second book of Samuel, chapter 19, verses 21 through 23. And here, Satan is actually used to describe Bashai, who was a nephew to David. Okay, David's nephew attempts to convince David to kill a Benjaminite by the name of Shimei, who actively speaks out against David in the name of King Saul. Okay, it is believed that David forgives the Benjaminite for his actions in order to gain favor amongst them, and this is why David refers to his nephew as Satan or as an adversary. Okay, just so that we understand the whole verse, though, of this passage in regards to David's mercy to this individual, I included verses 19 through 23 instead. And it says, Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, "May my lord not hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not bear it in mind. For your servant knows that I have sinned, therefore see I have come to this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should today become an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel?" The king said to Shimei, "You shall not die," and the king gave him his oath. Okay. Again, no use for the word, the actual proper use of the word Satan up to this point. Again, this is simply a Hebrew term that, again, refers to as an accuser or refers to somebody who is an adversary. Okay. The third instance is in Kings 1, chapter 5, verse 4, and King Solomon is actually reflecting that there are no more Satans or adversaries to fight. And in this actual passage, I included verses 1 through 4, and here we have that Solomon is actually speaking to this is actually a position between Solomon and Hiram, king of Tyre, okay, where the king of Tyre sends a letter to Solomon after he hears of Solomon taking appointment as king, okay, and King Solomon replies in his letter to Hiram that before his father David, there couldn't be a temple built to God because of the wars and the conflicts that were going on. And so he explains to that point that, that my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now my Lord God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. Okay, and then we have the fourth and fifth uses of the word actually appear in Kings 1, chapter 11. Okay, and the first part actually begins in verse 14, and the second one begins in verse 23. Now, just to kind of give like a paraphrase on what we have here is the adversary against Solomon is Hadad the Edomite, who was of the royal house of Edom, and he is actually opposing Solomon at this point. And this is one moment. Okay, and so he goes on to describe how Hadad fled Egypt with the Edomites, who were servants of his father, and he was a young boy at that time. And then he talks about how he was found in great favor in sight of the Pharaoh in verse 19, so that he gave him his sister-in-law for a wife, yada yada. Okay. In verse 23 of that same chapter, it says, God raised up another adversary against Solomon, who was Razan, son of Eladah, and who had fled from his master, King Hadaz. I'm sorry if I butchered this name here. King Hadadezer of Zobah. Okay, so he talks about how he was a leader of a marauding band. After the slaughter by David, they went to Damascus and settled there and made him a king of Damascus. He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, making trouble for Hadad. As Hadad did, he despised Israel and reigned over Aram. Okay, and in the last part of this one, we're going to concluding a little bit here. We have the last use of Satan in the Psalms. Okay, Psalm 109. And this is verses 1 through 6. Here the psalmist uses the word Satan to describe an adversary within legal proceedings that is falsely accusing him of wrongdoing. I personally included verses 1 through 8 here, but to understand like the actual passage, or to understand the passage completely, you really need to read all 31 verses of this psalm, not just, one or two verses, okay? In short, this particular psalm is actually sort of like a prayer of vindication against those that speak ill towards one person, okay? So by reading the entire psalm or the entire prayer, one that is accused of ill intent can be found innocent, and the accusers are recognized for their slanderous intents. Okay. So in it says, do not be silent, O God of my praise, for the wicked and deceitful mouths are opened against me, speaking against me with lying tongues. They beseech me with words of hate and attack me without cause. In return for my love, they accuse me even while I make prayer for them. Okay, so they reward me evil for good and hatred for my love. They say, appoint a wicked man against him, let an accuser stand on his right. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, let his prayer be counted as sin. May his days find few, may another seize his position. Okay, just so that we take note here that again in verse 6, appoint a wicked man against him, let an accuser stand on his right. This is actually fairly typical of even courtrooms to this very day, where the prosecuting attorney actually sits on the right side of the courtroom, and that is usually closest to the jury box. This of course depends on the actual layout of the courtroom itself. There are some times where the jury box sits on the left side of the room, but for the most part, many courtrooms fall within that particular standard, where the jury box sits on the right, the prosecuting attorney sits on the right side of the courtroom. Right, and with that, I believe that I'm going to end this first part, and we will be continuing with part 2. I'll cover The four celestial uses of the word Satan towards angels within God's court, along with a couple other definitions and a brief discussion, Egregore, and provide my conclusion at that point. So I will see you in part 2.